Hello, and welcome to our first module for integrating iPads and one-to-one technology at our school. We're going to start by talking about technology integration and some great models that help our thinking about integrating the technology into our classrooms. And so we're going to talk about the SAMR model and Bloom's taxonomy. Both of these tools will help you better understand the framework for integrating technology so that as you plan your lessons, we're focused less on the device itself or the app itself and more on the outcomes of learning. So common pitfalls of technology integration. One is focusing on the app over the academic standard. As with everything, as we introduce this technology and we use it more often with our students, we still need to be focused on the learning. How does the technology support the learning? Never how does the learning fit with the technology. Another pitfall is not calculating the impact of cognitive load. And this is basically a reminder that many of these apps and platforms that you're using or the tasks that you will ask your students to do are new to them. They may be digital natives, but that doesn't mean they're familiar with every piece of technology and every app out there. So as you plan, make sure that you create space for them to learn the app as well as the academic skill. Another one is assuming that our students will be a quick study due to being digital natives. We cannot assume that all of our students have the same access to technology. In the next module, we'll talk about some of the reasons why, but we cannot assume that our students know everything already. We must assume that they know nothing and that we give them the opportunities to learn and to grow. Another big one is student privacy concerns. I know no one would ever actively put student information out into the internet. However, it's really important that we be mindful of what the apps and websites we're using do to collect student data. Another common pitfall is wanting to control the product or the process. The reality is, as we use this technology, your students are very creative people, and they may come up with something totally different than what you planned, or the way you envisioned something may not turn out. And that's okay. We need to be less concerned about the product and be more concerned about how the technology is supporting learning. So our first tool we're going to talk about is the SAMR model, which stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And this is a great plan, a great model for us to be using technology and think about what kinds of activities that we're doing with the technology. So let's start with substitution. What is it? It means that the technology, the iPads in this case, are a direct substitute for the pen and paper tasks. It means there's really no change in what you're doing to the activity, you're just using the technology instead. In most cases, it means that if the technology wasn't working, you could still do the activity basically with no changes to your lesson plan. So an example would be students use library books or the Epic app to research information for a writing assignment. So Epic is an online library of books. So if the Wi-Fi was down or if the device wasn't working, you could still do the research activity because you have physical books from the library as well. But you also have a technology option to support and maybe make things a bit more convenient. The next stage is augmentation. So what is that? Technology substitutes for pen and paper tasks, but the way you're using the technology makes things more functional. And so basically that means you're using the technology, it's pretty similar to what you would have done without it, but there are certain things that make it more easy for students to be able to complete it, or maybe easier for you to grade or easier for you to give feedback. So specifically an example, students would be filling out a digital graphic organizer, and it uses spell check features so they can self-correct their own spelling. Or it could be that students are submitting their assignments using an LMS. So you can have things be automatically graded, or it's easy because they've given you the work and it's in one spot and you can quickly go through and mark things as turned in. Just a little bit more functionality to it. Another one we'll just, so you understand this idea of making things more convenient. So substitution is where the technology is there in your lesson, but not essential. Augmentation is you're using it. It's still pretty similar to what you would have done without it. However, your life is a little bit simpler, or students' lives are a little bit simpler because you're using the technology. So modification, we're moving into a new layer. You'll start to see that when you have a lesson at the modification level, the task is redesigned. So that means the technology is now very essential to your lesson. It means that what you're doing and the type of task or assessment that you're doing cannot be done without the technology. So, for example, students type their writing assignments on a Google Doc. Peers and the teacher give feedback using a commenting feature and suggesting features. And then you can review the edits and what the students did with that feedback using the version history in Google Docs. So it's a really great feature of Google Docs, but you couldn't do this without the technology, being able to see and track the exact progress of students throughout the app or throughout the project. Another example would be using a video tool to publish work, or creating digital books, things like that, where if you didn't have the technology, you wouldn't be able to do the task. And then redefinition is when technology creates a new task that's never been seen before, never been understood before, and it also requires technology to be able to complete. So for example, you have your students do research on animal habitats, and then they design an augmented or virtual reality to demonstrate their research and their learning. And so you could not do this without technology, but also this wouldn't have been conceivable until the advent of augmented or virtual reality technology. So a lot of people want to view the SAMR model this way, where you've got substitution, it's just a plain old cup of coffee. Augmentation, it's a latte. Modification, you got a bit fancier, it's a caramel macchiato. And redefinition, that is your pumpkin spice. It's the best of the best. If you want to go for it, you're definitely going to go for pumpkin spice. However, that is not a good way to think about this. The SAMR model is not trying to take technology and say, this is the best way to do it, and if you're not doing it this way, it's not worth your time. Every level of SAMRs is meaningful. There's not one that's necessarily better than the other, because again, it's about integrating technology so that it supports the learning. There are going to be some lessons where a substitution level is what you really need to help students be successful. But then there are other lessons where you do want to be at the redefinition level. It's very important that you never focus too much on the technology or too much on the flashiness of what you're doing, and that you focus on the learning and always be thinking, how is the technology supporting learning? So don't feel like every lesson you do needs to be modification and redefinition. That's entirely not true. A better way to think of the SAMR model is like this. So the substitution is the base. Redefinition is the top. It's like a pyramid. If you don't have the base, if you never do a single lesson that is just substitution, it's very likely that your students will not be successful in lessons that are at the redefinition level. And so if you look to the side of this graphic, you'll see enhancement and transformation. And so it means that substitution and augmentation, any lesson that falls in those categories, you're enhancing the learning. That's good. That's what we want. If you have a lesson at modification and redefinition, you're transforming the lesson. Also good. Every level of SAMR is good. We don't want to stay on the same level 100% of the time, because then we're not giving students an opportunity to work with different skills. But don't feel pressured that if not all your lessons are these amazing, flashy, beautiful things that you think you could put on Twitter or Instagram. Because remember, sometimes learning is messy and learning is basic. Sometimes learning is boring. Like, we know this. We know that there are just some things that we have to practice, and that's okay. I will say this 1,000 times throughout this module, but we must be using the technology to support the learning and the academic standard. Never, never, never focusing on the technology by itself. And then on the other hand, we have Bloom's, and Bloom's and SAMR go together really, really well. So Bloom's taxonomy is remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So essentially, these are the different skills. Remembering is the basic, students can recall information, and you move further and further up doing higher order thinking skills until you get to create, where students are taking information and they're creating things using it. So they are not only applying it and evaluating its accuracy, but they are creating something new that demonstrates the learning. So why are these important? So yeah, you can see here we've got our pyramid. Remembering is at the bottom, and it goes all the way up to create. So think of it this way. Most substitution tasks are going to be helping you do activities at the remember and understand levels. Most augmentation lessons are going to be helping you at the understand and apply, maybe even analyze. Modification and redefinition lessons are going to help you really hit that evaluate and create, those higher order thinking skills that we are really wanting to push students to engage with. So why are these things important? Number one, technology tasks being higher on Bloom's helps to integrate critical thinking and problem solving. That's what we want to build in our students. We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to be problem solvers. And so creating lessons that are intentionally having students engage with a higher level of Bloom's taxonomy means that we are supporting them with technology to be critical thinkers and problem solvers. It's also important because if we think about technology improving learning on its own, if we think that by giving our students these iPads, suddenly they're going to be performing so much better on their assessments, that's not true. You have to create a well-integrated lesson in order for them to be successful. And using these models and using these frameworks helps you to be aware as you're planning. Students should be scaffolded into doing these higher level tasks, like we talked about with the SAMR model. If you never do a substitution activity, chances are when you go to redefinition, they're not going to be very successful. So you need to get them introduced to the technology, get them used to how it works, what buttons to press, what apps to go to, how things work, and then build up to where they're applying this information that they have. Also, you need to keep in mind that redefinition projects are going to take longer. So you're going to need to combine some tasks. You may even have to get rid of a portion of the project to avoid students and yourself feeling overwhelmed. And also never forget to co-learn with your students and to try new things. It is okay if you don't know everything about an app before you have students use it. In fact, most of the time when I use apps with my students, I give them about 20 to 30 minutes to just mess around with it. I tell them to open the app and learn something that they can teach me by the end of the lesson. And it's so cool to see them engage with it, to figure out what different buttons do and how they can do really cool work. And then when we take our class information and our skills and our academic standards and we apply it to the app, they create really great work. On paper, this lesson would take a long time, but the product is so much better for it. So never be afraid to co-learn, and don't be afraid to take a little extra time to create something truly amazing. So if you'd like to learn more, here are some references you can look at, and it will give you a really great idea about how you can use technology and Bloom's and SAMR to really create some awesome lessons.